I know that deep down I'm okay. So many people can write horrible things, and every day.
The breaking point. No one saw coming. It happened just after 7:04 in the morning, when the sky over London still carried the pale blue quiet of a winter dawn. Most of the country hadn't yet poured their first cup of tea when the palace issued a short, urgent announcement, one so abrupt, so tightly worded, that newsroom editors scrambled to verify it twice before reading it aloud. The statement landed like a cold ripple across the nation. It referenced an escalation stemming from recent commentary by Sarah, Duchess of York, and confirmed that senior officials had convened an immediate review in response. No further details, no softening, but the implication was unmistakable. Sarah Ferguson had crossed a line, and the palace had been forced to respond before sunrise. What made the moment extraordinary was not merely the timing, but the figure at the center of it. Sarah was not known for public confrontation. Her relationship with the monarchy had always existed in fragile balance, sometimes warm, sometimes strained, but never aggressive. She understood better than most what happened when the royal institution turned its gaze inward. She had lived through headlines that stripped her of reputation, endured financial humiliation, and navigated the unforgiving scrutiny that came with being tied to Andrew's downfall. She had survived by keeping her tone measured, her interviews cautious, her comments polished. But last night she did something she had not done in decades. She spoke plainly, and she spoke Meghan's name. Those who saw the clip described the shift immediately. Her voice wasn't sharp or angry. It was weighted, as if the words had been sitting on her tongue for far too long. She questioned Meghan's choices, questioned her narrative, questioned the repeated resurfacing of grievances that had overshadowed the Crown's winter schedule. And though Sarah did not accuse, she implied something even more volatile, that Meghan's pattern of public reinvention had caused harm that the palace could no longer ignore. It took only minutes for the clip to travel across social platforms. Within the hour, morning talk shows in the UK replayed her remarks while analysts speculated about whether this was an intentional warning shot or a moment of emotional fatigue. But what turned a simmering tension into a full-scale crisis was the reaction online. Supporters praised Sarah for finally saying what others were afraid to. Critics accused her of targeting Meghan to distract from Andrew's ongoing controversies, and American commentators fueled the flames further by framing the moment as a royal woman breaking ranks in an institution built on silence. By the time the palace press office opened their lines just after 6:58, the volume of media inquiries had already surpassed their early morning capacity. Senior aides reported that multiple outlets were preparing segments analyzing Sarah's remarks as an official royal critique of Meghan. That alone would have forced the palace into defensive communication, but overnight monitoring flagged something worse. A wave of accounts, some verified, many anonymous, began circulating threads claiming Sarah's comments revealed internal divisions within Buckingham Palace itself. A narrative had formed, fast and dangerously inaccurate, suggesting that senior royals were turning on one another. That was the moment the palace panicked. Inside Clarence House, a rapid response team was assembled before sunrise. Communication advisors, private secretaries, and senior officials scrambled into a room usually reserved for late-night briefings on state matters. The mood was tense, clipped, and unnervingly cold. Their task was not simply to contain fallout, but to determine whether Sarah's remarks required a formal distancing or a broader institutional clarification. What alarmed them wasn't simply that Meghan's name had surfaced again in controversy. It was that the call-out had come from within the family, not from commentators, journalists, or fringe online speculation. A member of the royal inner circle had ignited the spark, and the monarchy could no longer retreat behind the usual protocol of silence. Charles was informed immediately. According to one senior aide, he reacted with a long, strained pause, one that conveyed more emotion than words could. He knew Sarah's voice carried cultural memory. For many over the age of 50, she represented a figure who had endured both ridicule and sympathy. Someone whose candidness made her unpredictable but also distinctly human. Her speaking out meant something. Her speaking Meghan's name meant even more. William's reaction was sharper. He had seen the clip in full before the sun broke over Windsor. He understood how quickly narratives could spiral, how fast misinformation could overtake intention, and how dangerously American media could amplify anything involving Meghan. He had already endured 2 challenging weeks navigating public chatter about Catherine's health. The last thing the monarchy needed was a new fracture, particularly one that suggested internal chaos. A narrative of royal infighting would destabilize the season, overshadow scheduled engagements, and reignite speculation about the firmness of the institution's leadership. William read the online reaction, saw the tone spiraling into accusation, and realized the palace had only one option: respond swiftly before speculation hardened into belief. Even Camilla felt the urgency. Having lived through her own decades of reputational storms, she recognized the early signs of a narrative that could overtake reality if left unchecked. For her, Sarah's remarks carried a chilling echo. She knew how easily one sentence could be lifted from context, turned into a weapon, and used to paint the monarchy as fractured or hypocritical. And so, at 7:04, the palace acted. A rare, urgent statement. A public acknowledgement that Sarah's commentary required institutional clarification. A signal that the Crown would not allow speculation to define the story. And underneath it all, a truth the public did not yet know. This was only the beginning. The weeks of quiet tension leading to today. To understand how the palace found itself issuing an urgent dawn announcement mere minutes after Sarah Ferguson spoke, we must return to the quiet, uneasy weeks that preceded this moment. Because nothing inside the monarchy ever erupts suddenly. Crises arrive slowly, quietly, gathering weight in the corners of rooms, behind closed doors, in the subtle shifts of tone and timing that only those who have lived long within this world know how to read. It began in the middle of January, when winter pressed deep into Windsor and the palace found itself juggling more emotional strain than protocol ever intended to hold. Senior aides had noticed a pattern forming, a strange rhythm in the commentary surrounding the royal family, particularly around Meghan's recent public endeavors. It wasn't dramatic at first, not enough to draw headlines or raise alarms, but something about the tone felt different. Not hostile, not chaotic, simply persistent. Mentions of Meghan's projects surfaced at moments that conveniently overlapped with royal engagements, overshadowing events that ordinarily captured the stability-focused audiences the monarchy relied on. It wasn't malicious, at least not in any way that could be proven, but it was disrupting the palace's carefully planned winter narrative. At that time, Catherine's schedule remained deliberately light, and Charles's engagements were balanced cautiously to protect his health. Public reassurance was needed, not friction, and yet friction arrived anyway. Every time William appeared at an event, reporters slipped in questions about transatlantic tensions. Every time Charles met a diplomat, whispers circulated about conflicting royal messaging. No one accused Meghan of anything explicitly. Rumors never needed her involvement to take root. They simply used her name as a lighted match under dry branches, because people listened and narratives grew. Princess Anne noticed the shift before anyone else. She always did. She had spent decades navigating headlines without theatrics, cutting through chaos with duty as her compass. So when a mid-level aide handed her a weekly media brief one brisk morning on the last week of January, she paused longer than usual. Patterns hovered between the lines. The same commentators repeating identical phrasing. The same speculative segments resurfacing with new thumbnails, but the same tone. None of it was explosive. All of it was relentless. Anne felt the early tremor of something preparing to break. Meanwhile, Sarah Ferguson found herself pulled into the narrative far earlier than she wished. Invitations she had accepted months earlier suddenly included commentary segments she had not agreed to. Producers probed gently, then less gently, asking about her view of the current royal climate. Sarah declined every chance to talk about Meghan, at first. But with Andrew's relocation still fresh in public memory, and Sarah juggling her own reinvention, she found the pressure disorienting. The palace expected her to remain neutral. The public expected her to pick a side. But the truth was simpler. Sarah was tired of the endless comparisons, the constant framing of the monarchy as split between camps, and she sensed that the tension building around her would not subside without confrontation. By early February, the strain had seeped into palace routines. Staff noticed shifts in tone between departments. Small misunderstandings felt heavier than they should have. Emails were shorter. Meetings ran longer. Every conversation seemed to orbit the same question. Who was shaping the narrative beyond the palace walls? Charles felt it most acutely. His winter calendar depended on unity, or at least the appearance of it. He required steadiness, not speculation. And yet speculation found him anyway. Diplomats in New York raised concerns about media confusion surrounding the royal family. Commonwealth representatives noted rising chatter about internal friction. It didn't matter that none of it was grounded in fact. Perception was enough to create pressure. William's winter briefings grew increasingly tense. He had no interest in sparking conflict, but he would not allow confusion to undermine the institution he would one day lead. When advisors began reporting that Sarah's name kept appearing alongside Meghan's in trending topics, not through Sarah's doing, but through endless commentary, William grew uneasy. Not because he feared drama, but because he feared misinterpretation. In the modern era, intention rarely mattered. Optics ruled everything. Throughout this quiet escalation, Sarah endured her own private storms. She heard whispers comparing her decades-old struggles to Meghan's recent reinventions. She watched interview clips questioning who had faced more adversity, who had handled fame with more grace, who had suffered more at the hands of public expectation. It wasn't competition she wanted, it was clarity. But clarity never came. Instead, the questions grew louder, and Sarah, already carrying the weight of Andrew's shadow, felt herself slipping into the gravitational pull of a story she had not asked to join. What broke her silence wasn't anger, it was exhaustion. After weeks of being drawn into narratives she had not shaped, she reached a point where neutrality no longer felt dignified. So when the interviewer asked once again about palace dynamics, Sarah finally spoke. Not to attack, not to provoke, but to release herself from the silent tension she had carried for too long. She mentioned Meghan by name. She offered her perspective with unusual bluntness. And within hours, that decision shattered the fragile balance the palace had been desperately trying to maintain. Sarah Ferguson's untold perspective. To understand why Sarah Ferguson finally spoke, we must step into the quiet interior world she had been navigating for months, a world layered with unspoken expectations, subtle pressures, and the uneasy weight of being pulled back into royal narratives she had outgrown long ago. For Sarah, life in early February carried an unusual stillness. Royal Lodge, once the center of her unconventional stability, felt different now, quieter, emptied of the rhythm she had known for decades. Andrew's transition to smaller, more discreet accommodations had left the estate echoing with a kind of emotional vacancy she had never anticipated. And though Sarah had adjusted to reinvention many times throughout her life, this reinvention, this winter chapter, felt more personal, more precarious. She sensed the palace watching her with careful eyes, not out of suspicion, but out of wary respect. They trusted she would not ignite unnecessary trouble, but they also understood her unpredictability. Sarah had always possessed a candidness the institution found both refreshing and dangerous. She was capable of empathy, warmth, and loyalty, but also of speaking truths others kept buried. It was that very trait that unsettled the royal household as she re-entered public conversation. The interview invitations came steadily. Some asked for her insights into modern royal life. Others wanted commentary on her charitable work. But the underlying intent grew clearer as the weeks passed. Producers wanted Sarah to respond to the growing discourse surrounding Meghan and the monarchy's recent challenges. She declined repeatedly, but the questions followed her like shadows. Friends began asking her privately why she stayed silent. Journalists hinted that her perspective could bring balance to ongoing speculation. Even acquaintances she barely knew suggested that her voice mattered in a way the public might not admit but deeply valued. At first, Sarah dismissed it all. She had survived decades of scrutiny and she knew better than to jump into a narrative still unfolding. But the pressure did not fade. Instead, it intensified. threading itself into the quiet moments of her day. She felt it in the charity meetings where conversations turned toward media tone. She heard it in the sympathetic murmurs from those still navigating Andrew's transition. She sensed it in the way her own name resurfaced online, always accompanied by comparisons she never asked for. What wore her down, however, was not the public's expectation, but the private frustration brewing inside her. Sarah had spent years rebuilding herself, reshaping her identity from scandal to service, from caricature to survivor. And yet, no matter how much progress she made, she found her story intertwined with royal narratives she did not control. When commentators began speculating about her stance toward Meghan, assigning her opinions she had never voiced, Sarah felt a distinct tightening in her chest. She disliked being misquoted by silence just as much as by speech. Parallel to all of this was a truth she rarely admitted. She felt protective of the monarchy in a way that surprised even her. Not because it had always protected her, it hadn't, but because she understood its fragility more intimately than most. Having experienced isolation at the height of her own turmoil, she recognized the early signs of narratives spiraling beyond repair, and she feared the winter chatter surrounding the royal family was leading toward another fracture, one that would hurt everyone involved. In late February, a quiet conversation tipped the scale. It took place over a simple cup of tea with a longtime colleague who worked adjacent to royal causes. The woman remarked almost casually that public trust in royal messaging had become scattered, pulled between conflicting interpretations of recent events. She noted how often Meghan's projects inadvertently overshadowed palace schedules. She mentioned the rising discomfort among older viewers who felt the monarchy's winter stability was at risk. And then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "People want someone they can trust to tell the truth, someone who understands both the institution and independence, someone who's lived through the storms, not just watched them." Sarah felt that sentence like a stone dropped into still water. She knew immediately that the expectations being placed upon her were unfair. Yet she also knew they came from a place of genuine confusion and longing for clarity. That night she lay awake far longer than usual. She thought about her daughters, about the decades of learning how to stand on her own feet after falling publicly. She thought about her own history with narratives she couldn't control. And she thought about Meghan, not with anger, not with rivalry, but with a weary recognition of how quickly stories can escalate around a woman who becomes a lightning rod. The next morning, when she arrived at the studio for what was supposed to be a light conversation about charity work, she felt a strange calm settle over her. She had no intention of criticizing Meghan. She had no desire to pick a side. But when the interviewer gently asked about the atmosphere surrounding the royal family and whether she believed the public narrative was helping or hurting, Sarah knew she had reached the edge of what she could politely absorb. Her answer wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't strategic. It was the truth she had carried quietly for far too long. She spoke about responsibility, about timing, about the delicate balance between reinvention and respect for the institution. And for the first time in years, she said Meghan's name out loud, not as an adversary, not as a symbol, but as part of the complicated landscape pulling the monarchy into the public eye once again. In that moment, Sarah wasn't trying to create chaos. She was trying to reclaim honesty. She had no idea that within hours the palace would be forced into urgent response. No idea that her brief moment of candor would ripple into a national event. But that is the nature of royal life. The smallest truths carry the greatest weight. The palace reacts. Urgency, alarm, and a closed-door summit. The first alerts reached Buckingham Palace less than 20 minutes after Sarah's interview aired, carried through internal communication channels designed for moments of heightened sensitivity, but rarely activated before midday. A young media monitoring aide, barely 4 months into the job, was the first to grasp the significance. She hesitated only a second before forwarding the clip to her supervisor, who in turn sent it to the communications director with a terse note, "We have an escalation." Inside the palace, where winter mornings moved slowly and deliberately, the sudden pulse of urgency felt almost foreign. Staff who were accustomed to the calm rhythm of early briefings found themselves rushing down corridors still dimly lit by the soft, yellowed glow of sconces. It wasn't chaos, not yet. It was something sharper, more contained, the kind of tension that suggests a story is moving faster than the institution built to manage it. By 7:05, senior advisors had gathered in the Lancaster Room, a place typically reserved for diplomatic preparations rather than family crises. But this morning required discretion and immediacy, and the Lancaster provided both. Aides huddled around a single long table, papers spread between them, screens flickering with the spreading coverage. Sarah's comments were polite, measured, even empathetic, but they had crossed the threshold the palace spent years avoiding. She had spoken Meghan's name directly, and she had done so in a context that critics and commentators could easily reshape into a narrative of internal royal critique. The communications director replayed the clip 3 times. Each viewing tightened the atmosphere in the room further. When he finally exhaled, he said, "This will divide audiences within the hour." That was the moment everyone understood the seriousness. Meghan's name carried global weight. Any comment, no matter how soft, could be interpreted as tension. And tension, in a winter where the monarchy sought stability, was dangerous. William was notified shortly thereafter. He was at Windsor, reviewing documents for an upcoming engagement, when his private secretary entered with a look that signaled the end of any remaining calm. William set aside the paperwork immediately. He watched the clip without blinking, his expression unreadable. But those who knew him well noticed the subtle tightening of his jaw, the way his shoulders straightened slightly as if bracing for impact. William didn't concern himself with gossip. He concerned himself with narrative momentum. And this moment carried momentum he could not ignore. Meanwhile, Charles received the update from his senior private secretary at Clarence House. The king listened in silence, his face betraying little. But the heaviness in his eyes was unmistakable. He had hoped for a winter unmarred by internal speculation, a season of quieter engagements and steady reassurance. Yet here he was again, learning that a single sentence, spoken with sincerity but received with volatility, had the potential to shift the palace's entire public posture. He asked to see the clip. When it ended, he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "We must not let this become another storm," he said quietly. "Not now." The first emergency call took place between Charles, William, Camilla, and Princess Anne. Camilla joined from a sitting room still wrapped in early morning stillness. Anne dialed in from Gatcombe, interrupting her preparations for a planned engagement. Each understood immediately what was at stake. They did not blame Sarah. None of them doubted her sincerity or her intentions. What concerned them was the narrative beginning to take shape online. Headlines already framed the moment as a royal rupture. American outlets began speculating whether Sarah had spoken with palace approval. Others suggested she was signaling deeper tensions that she alone had dared to voice. It didn't matter that none of it was grounded in fact. Perception was enough to create pressure. Anne was the first to speak with unmistakable clarity. "We need to act before this grows a spine," she said. "If we delay, we surrender control of the narrative." William agreed. Silence could no longer be used as a shield, not when speculation was multiplying in real time. Camilla took a softer but equally firm stance. She reminded them of the public's fragile trust during the winter months and how easily compassion for one figure could be turned into criticism of another. "This cannot become a family fracture," she said. "We cannot allow them to paint it as that." Charles listened to all of them, absorbing every word. When he finally spoke, his decision carried the steady weight of a king who understood both the institution and the humanity behind it. "We must clarify without condemnation," he said. "We acknowledge the escalation without assigning fault, and we re-establish the boundary." The boundary, unspoken but deeply ingrained, was that internal commentary stayed internal. No matter how gently spoken, once it reached the public, the palace had no choice but to reassert control. Within minutes, speechwriters were summoned, drafts began circulating, and the cadence of royal messaging shifted into emergency mode. By 7:04, the palace issued its urgent announcement, not dramatic, not accusatory, simply precise. It confirmed that senior officials were reviewing the escalation and reaffirming unity across the family. It signaled protection, not punishment, and yet beneath its measured tone lay the undeniable truth. The announcement heard around the world. The palace's urgent announcement, released at 7:04 in the morning, traveled faster than anyone inside Buckingham expected. Within 3 minutes, every major UK network had interrupted routine programming. By the 10-minute mark, the statement had crossed the Atlantic, landing in American newsrooms where anchors, still adjusting their earpieces, tried to mask their astonishment. It was not just the timing that captured attention, it was the unmistakable firmness. The palace had acknowledged an escalation linked to recent public commentary involving the Duchess of York, and confirmed that senior officials were conducting an immediate review. Those 2 sentences alone were enough to ignite global speculation. Royal announcements rarely referenced internal dynamics. Rarer still were statements issued at dawn. But the extraordinary early morning release signaled something the public understood instinctively. This was not routine. This was not symbolic. This was intervention. The phrasing was careful, deliberate, shaped to prevent misinterpretation while simultaneously halting the narrative spiraling online. It made no mention of Meghan directly, yet everyone understood the unspoken context. Sarah's mention of her name had accelerated public discussion to a level the palace could not ignore. The institution had stepped in not to reprimand, but to reclaim control before speculation hardened into myth. The public response split almost immediately. In London, callers flooded radio shows, praising the palace for restoring steadiness after days of swirling tension. Older audiences, long supportive of Sarah, expressed sympathy for her candor and frustration that her words had sparked such intensity. Younger viewers dissected every phrase of the statement on social platforms, creating threads, theories, and timelines that multiplied far faster than royal staff could track. Across the United States, commentators framed the announcement as evidence of internal friction, even though the statement itself bent carefully away from such interpretation. Panels debated whether the urgency reflected deep concern or preventative caution. Some argued the palace was signaling unity. Others insisted it was a warning shot, an effort to remind all royal affiliates of the delicate balance required when speaking publicly. But behind the scenes, those inside the royal household felt something deeper. The air shifted, not with panic, but with the sobering awareness that the institution had entered a new phase of communication. Gone were the days when silence could smother speculation. The digital storm moved too quickly now, too loudly. A single comment, spoken with sincerity, received with intensity, had triggered a chain reaction requiring immediate intervention. William watched the coverage quietly from Windsor. He had expected global attention, but not the speed at which the story expanded. He understood the necessity of the statement, yet he felt the weight of it too. This was his future kingdom, and moments like this clarified how fragile public perception could be. Charles received updates throughout the morning, absorbing them with a somber calm. He disliked public statements rooted in family dynamics, but he knew this one had been essential. The monarchy could not afford another narrative slipping beyond its reach. Sarah remained privately silent after her interview, choosing not to respond to the global whirlwind she had unknowingly set in motion. By midday, one truth felt unmistakably clear. The announcement had landed not as a reaction, but as a turning point, a reminder that even a brief moment of honesty, spoken by someone who had weathered decades of storms, could reshape the palace's entire strategy before the sun had fully risen. What this means for the monarchy's future. In the hours following the palace's urgent announcement, something quieter and far more significant settled across the royal households, a realization that this moment was not simply a brief disturbance, but a turning point, one that would shape communication, unity, and decision-making for months to come. The monarchy had always operated with an unspoken rule. Internal dynamics remained internal. But the digital world had shattered the old walls of privacy, and even the most measured comment could now echo across continents within minutes. Sarah's interview, though gentle and grounded in her own experience, revealed just how fragile those walls had become. Within the palace, advisors understood that the urgent statement had set a precedent. Fast, transparent messaging would no longer be an exception. It would become a necessity. This shift felt uncomfortable, even unnatural for an institution built on careful pacing and deliberate silence. Yet the reaction to Sarah's remarks demonstrated that waiting even for a few hours risked ceding control to speculation. The monarchy's future now depended on its ability to navigate crises at the speed of the modern world. William felt this more than anyone. As heir, he had long known that one day he would inherit not only the crown, but the complexities of a public that processed royal news in real time. Seeing how quickly the narrative evolved this morning confirmed a truth he had been quietly preparing for. Leadership now required immediacy as much as dignity. He spoke privately with advisors about establishing new protocols, ones that balanced tradition with the necessity for rapid clarity. His tone was calm but resolute. This moment had changed the landscape. Charles, too, absorbed the implications with thoughtful gravity. He understood the personal dimension of the situation, how difficult it must have been for Sarah to voice her perspective after weeks of being pulled into conversations she never sought. Yet he also understood the institutional consequence. Every public word carried the weight of 1,000 interpretations. The monarchy could not afford misalignment, even accidental. In this new era, unity was not just symbolic, it was strategic. For Sarah, the aftermath was complicated. She had spoken from a place of honesty, never anticipating the tidal wave her words would unleash. Those close to her said she spent the morning in quiet reflection, aware that the palace's reaction had been necessary but also saddened that her sincerity had generated such force. She did not regret speaking, but she understood now why others held their tongues. The palace was not angry with her, but it would need time to rebalance. The institution always needed time. Across the UK, public reaction continued to evolve. Many saw the announcement as a sign of strength, a proof that the monarchy could still course-correct with precision when needed. Others felt a pang of empathy for Sarah, whose candidness had once again drawn her into the center of a story larger than herself. In the United States, commentators debated what this moment signaled about the royal family's internal resilience. Some believed the monarchy had demonstrated unity, others believed it revealed tension. But the truth, as always, lay somewhere quieter. This moment showed that the monarchy could adapt, that despite the weight of history, it could still respond to the unpredictable currents of modern conversation. As evening settled over London, the palace grounds glowed softly in the winter light. The urgent announcement had done its job. The storm had not vanished, but it had been contained, clarified, steadied. And in that stillness, a new understanding emerged. The monarchy's future would not be defined by the crises it faced, but by how swiftly and how gracefully it learned to confront them. In the quiet after today's turmoil, one truth remains clear. Even the strongest institutions are shaped by the voices around them. Thank you for watching, for reflecting, and for staying with this unfolding chapter. Until the next story emerges, stay thoughtful, stay observant, and stay kind.